Hi, my name is Laura Quiroz, and I am a student in the doctoral program for educational leadership at Fresno State. This is my Curation Project video for multilingual reform and education. I will be taking you to how education reform happened in multilingual studies for multilingual students, how it started as a social movement, as a need for immigration reform, and how it eventually turned into education reform and how we were able to take students who are multilingual students from a deficit model to an asset-based model. We will begin first with the proper terminology for multilingual students. You might have heard some of these terms in the past, ESL, which stands for English as a Second Language, which is correct for the classes that students take, but not to refer to a student who uses a language other than English. The term EL, English learner, or ELL, English language learner, are the terms that are most often used. And while the term is technically correct, the term English learner actually carries negative connotation and does not value the other languages and cultures that students bring forth, and can negatively impact student self-esteem and academic performance. And so we prefer a strengths-based label like multilingual student. The term bilingual is technically correct if a student speaks two languages, but we know that oftentimes our students speak more than two languages. So, historically, bilingual education was actually non existent in the United States in the late 1800s and early 1900s. Um, and so, in the United States, as we can see by this timeline, a lot of things led up to how multilingual education became a reform in the United States. Like I said earlier, in like 36 states, bilingual education was actually banned. What we really focused on in the early 1900s was assimilation. We wanted students to forget their culture and their language in their home countries, and we really wanted them to assimilate to the customs and the languages of the United States. We wanted everyone to just speak English. And so we call this a deficit model because we are focusing on the things that our students do not know rather than the things that the students bring with them. And so we start our story today with this really negative deficit model in education when it comes to multilingual learners. And so immigrants, as a result, immigrants and multilingual students were really treated as second-class citizens in the early 1900s. And, we viewed them from this deficit model. This political cartoon sums up what was happening in the early 1900s, this very negative sentiment towards immigrants and anybody who did not speak English proficiently. So, this negative immigrant sentiment, along with just a lack of educational services, brewed this social movement for a while. There was also the Immigration Act that allowed an influx of immigration in the early 1960s. And so this led to more anti immigrant sentiment. But it also led to immigrant communities wanting reform, wanting for educational institutions to provide services in home languages or to provide bilingual education, particularly for Cuban immigrants in the 1960s. And so, what happened in the 1960s was this really a nice chain of events that led to some education reform for multilingual learners. It all started in 1965 with the Civil Acts, right? And then led to Bilingual Education Act. And then we know that in 1974, the Lau versus Nichols case was this landmark legislation that made its way to the Supreme Court that finally cited the Civil Rights Act to make sure that students who did not speak English proficiently were provided the proper education. And so, slowly but surely, because of the social movement in the 1960s, we were able to pass legislation and reform, including ESEA or Title VII of ESEA, which led to bilingual education in the country and ensuring that students were getting what they actually needed. So over the past 10 or so years, we've developed ELD standards and ELD framework, a lot of resources for educators to use to really help multilingual learners not just keep and celebrate their culture and their language, but also learn English at the same time. And so this is an example of a great resource called the English Learner Roadmap that is available in California to help ensure that multilingual learners, quote, fully and meaningfully access and participate in 21st century education. This is a turning point from this deficit narrative to really an asset narrative for multilingual learners. As a result, by viewing students for their assets, it allows us to see what they really bring to the table. And so there's been a push for this as well as dual language programs and really ensuring that students keep their language and while they're learning a second language. We know of the many benefits that come with a bilingual brain, including mental health and academic performance, and just future preparation, especially in California. And so the shift to viewing students to an asset-based approach has really helped not tell a story, a single-sided story. We know that there is a huge danger to a single story, as we know from this inspiring TED Talk. And we want to make sure that we view all perspectives and give students an opportunity to tell all sides of the story, not just have them fit the mold of our story. Our students come to us with rich cultures and languages and community. And so Dr. Tara Yosso's concept of community cultural wealth, although it was intended for higher education, it really sums up this asset-based approach to viewing multilingual learners. And it views their strengths as capitals that they bring to this cultural community wealth. And as educators, it's really important that we acknowledge this counter story, right? This beautiful story that our students are telling. A few tools that could help us do that. Culturally responsive teaching or culturally relevant pedagogy help us do this. It help us really unlock the potential of our students by acknowledging and recognizing all of the assets and the cultures that they bring into the classroom. And I love this graphic by Dr. Jackie Gerstein that it's the asset model for educational approaches for kids from marginalized populations. And so they bring their personal powers. They have much to offer to our educational community. And it's really important that we acknowledge them and we celebrate them in our classrooms. And so by building on our students' community wealth, we are ensuring that we are viewing our multilingual learners from this assets-based approach so that they could contribute to our communities and our society. Our students are so wealthy with these community-based approaches, and they have so much to bring, and we need to acknowledge, honor, and celebrate them. And so we could see how our multilingual reform and education story started from a social need to reform immigration rights and bilingual education, leading to reform in education through the Civil Rights Act and leading to additional resources for teachers. And then finally, it's really important that as educators, especially as educational leaders, that we create this culture where we are viewing our students from an asset-based approach and what they have to bring to the classroom and not from this deficit model. Thank you so much for viewing my video.